Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Google Hangout on air. Empower Women is co-organizing this Google Hangout with the World Bank Group and specifically the team Women, Business and the Law report team. We are very excited to welcome our speakers from the World Bank today that will give you an insight to their latest report, Women, Business and the Law. And immediately after the Google Hangout, we'll kick off the e-discussion on empowerwomen.org. Briefly, we have two of our colleagues from the World Bank. We have Catherine Schultz and Nisha Kapundi, and they will talk to us a little bit about the findings from the Women, Business and the Law report and focus specifically on one topic, on women's mobility. So Catherine Schultz joined the Women's Business and the Law team in 2013, and she's focusing specifically on getting a job indicator. And she has many years of experience working on legal issues from the U.S. Department of Justice and from law firms, and she's a member of the District of Columbia Bar. And Nisha, she joined the Women, Business and the Law team in 2014, and she's focusing specifically on providing incentives to work and going to court indicators. And she's a member of the New York State Bar. Both of them have strong legal backgrounds, so we're very excited to have them on today's Google Hangout. After their presentation of the key findings from the 2016 report, we will be joined by some discussants that I will introduce at that time. We are very excited about this collaboration. It's the second time, and for those who are long-standing members of the Empower Women community, you know that in 2014 we had a similar Google Hangout and e-discussion that grew from the report of 2014 Women, Business and the Law. So we're very excited to have a second round from this conversation and to see what has evolved in the 2016 report. So I welcome Catherine and Nisha, and then we will, after your presentation, I will introduce the discussant today in today's Google Hangout. Over to you, Catherine and Nisha.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the introduction. We're also very excited to be partnering for the second time on this Google Hangout discussion, especially on such an important topic, which, as a lot of you know, has been getting a lot of attention sort of in international media and looking at it from a gender perspective. And so before we dive into our research on laws affecting women's mobility, we wanted to just provide you with a brief background on Women, Business and the Law. So Women, Business and the Law is a report that's published by the World Bank Group every 2 years, and we spotlight how laws, regulations, and institutions can either support or hinder women's economic opportunities. So we look at laws from an economic perspective to determine how they might shape women's economic outcomes. We make the business case for a legal framework that supports women's economic advancement. And our newest report, which Anna mentioned, is called Women, Business and the Law 2016, Getting to Equal. And in this report, we measured legal gender equality all over the world, and we tried to determine where restrictions could be preventing women from reaching their full economic potential. And as some of you may know, this is our fourth report in this series, and we've expanded in a number of ways since the last report. And the most notable way, I think, is that we've expanded our country coverage by 20%. So we've added 30 new economies, totaling 173 now. And what really surprised us is that even after adding these 30 economies, we still had the same main finding that we had in the 2014 report. And that is that 90% of economies worldwide have at least one law discriminating against women.
So I'll just jump right in here and start with the theme, which is obviously freedom of movement and mobility. Many of the laws that we examine in our report look at the ways that impede women's economic opportunities, and a lot of these have major implications for women's freedom of movement. So you all probably know that freedom of movement is a human right, but what you might not know is that it's also an economic imperative. When a woman's mobility is limited by laws, institutions, or other social norms, she can't fully participate in the economy. And this hurts the economic growth of not only the woman and her family, but also of her community and her country as a whole.
So in many economies, we see that women encounter more legal obstacles than men do.
Yeah, especially with regards to starting a business or sort of seeking paid employment outside the home. And this happens more often to married women than unmarried women. And the loss in rights happens at the time of marriage. And it happens for women, but not for men. And actually exclusively for women and never for men.
So where exactly do these obstacles lie, and how many economies have them? So this is some of the research that we did for our report. And in our research, we found that in 17 economies, married women cannot travel outside the home in the same way as married men. This is something that is written in the law. And so we've seen this in countries like Bahrain, Malaysia, Oman. We also found that in 6 economies, married women cannot travel outside the country in the same way as married men. And again, some examples: Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. And another finding that we had is that in 32 economies, which is a pretty significant number, married women cannot apply for a passport in the same way as their husbands. And so just to clarify, it's not that there's a blanket prohibition in the law preventing women from traveling or getting passports. It's that they're often subject to additional procedures or need special permissions solely because they're women, and so their husbands do not need these sort of need to take these extra steps. And as you know, any of you who've encountered sort of bureaucracy, applying for anything, when there's more steps, it can delay processes. It can sort of hinder, hinder your desire to even go through with it. And so this actually has massive economic consequences.
And just to give you all a couple of examples, in Afghanistan, women who aren't accompanied by their legal relatives and married women who aren't accompanied by their husbands or don't have written permission from their husbands, except for a few very narrow exceptions, cannot get a passport. And then another example from Dominica, so a very different part of the world, a married woman has to provide information about her husband's name and the date of their marriage and the place of their marriage when she's applying for a passport. And this would not be required for married men.
Yeah, and just to sort of emphasize, these are still the laws on the books, so this isn't something from the past that we're examining. This is what's current since between the period of April 2013 and April 2015. And so a lot of people ask us, well, are these laws even enforced? And the answer is yes. And we actually have an interesting case from Iran just a few months ago. The captain of the women's soccer team, or football for some of you, she had the opportunity to go play in the Asia Cup in Malaysia, and she actually encountered one of these legal obstacles. In Iran, a married woman, needs permission of her husband to travel outside the country, and her husband didn't grant her that permission, and so she actually missed out on an important opportunity in her soccer career because she had no way out of sort of this legal hurdle.
But what's exciting, though, about that whole story is that it sort of sparked this frenzy on Twitter and Facebook, and it created a lot of news in the international media. And men all over Iran started posting pictures, holding up the signed form showing that they granted permission to their wives to leave the country, and sort of that was their form of protesting this law. So hopefully we'll see a reform on that in the future.
And speaking of reforms, our report actually it tracks reforms that have happened over the past 2 years. And 2 that we saw came from Suriname and Senegal. They both reformed laws that previously prevented married women from passing citizenship onto their children in the same way that their husbands can. And so now we found that there's 22 countries worldwide where married mothers cannot pass their citizenship onto their children in the same way as their fathers. And this also has major implications for women's mobility and economic empowerment. So Nisha will explain how.
Yeah, so the reason why this matters is because women are most often the primary caregiver for others in their family. So women's mobility is really important because if a woman finds a job outside of the country that her children live in and her children aren't citizens, she can't leave where she's going, or she can't leave where her children are to seek employment. And nationality is also a prerequisite for accessing many government benefits, things like public health care, education, driver's licenses, work permits. And when women are forced to finance these benefits out of pocket and their children aren't citizens, there can be serious economic effects. In Jordan, for example, public school can cost up to 12 times more for non-citizens, and a 1-year work permit for a foreign spouse or a child can cost up to 5% of income per capita. So that's huge.
Yeah, and while laws are often the source of limits on women's mobility, there's actually a lot of social norms and institutionalized practices that can also pose barriers. So we also heard an interesting story actually coming from a former colleague from Uzbekistan. And in Uzbekistan, there's no laws restricting women's movement or requiring women to sort of go through additional procedures, but there's a very sort of institutionalized practice that requires a single woman under the age of 35 to get their father's permission to leave the country. So when this former colleague was traveling to Uzbekistan and she was actually on a work trip, she ran into a problem because she wasn't able to leave without getting her father's permission. And even having a letter from her employer wouldn't suffice. And what's also interesting about this practice is that, you know, going back to the intent of it, it wasn't actually just to discriminate against women. The intent was to protect them because they were trying to combat human trafficking to the Gulf states. And we see this a lot in our report, a lot of laws that sort of the intent behind sort of these discriminatory practices is to protect women, but it ends up having you know, a pretty negative consequence for their economic empowerment and human rights.
So I think we'll leave thread 1 at that and sort of jump into the next topic, which is sexual harassment in public places. And we know that it might not seem like sexual harassment has a connection with freedom of movement or women's economic empowerment, but obviously the topics are not as unrelated as you might think. Sexual harassment is a common form of sexual violence that can affect women's economic opportunities in a pretty big way. It often takes place in public places. So for example, when women are traveling to and from school or work, so places like the street, in buses, on buses, in train stations, any sort of public transportation. And sexual harassment will impact a woman's ability to move freely, and as a result, it will influence her decision to join the labor force or pursue employment or educational opportunities. And what we found in our most recent report is that only 18 economies specifically protect women from sexual harassment in public places. And 5 of the economies that protect women from sexual harassment in public places don't even have domestic violence laws, so it's interesting to note.
Yeah, and what's also really interesting about the Middle East and North Africa region is that you know, there's quite a few countries, 4 of them out of the 19, that have legislation criminalizing sexual harassment, but they don't actually use the term sexual harassment. So their laws, when you translate from Arabic, the terms they use are sort of offense to modesty, offense to morality, indecent exposure, obscene acts. And Egypt is actually one such example, and just in the past 2 years, they enacted a reform that criminalized sexual harassment not only in public places, but also in education and employment.
So MENA is really sort of leading the way in this type of legislation, but there are also a few other examples from different regions that we kind of wanted to highlight. For example, France has recently introduced new measures to curb sexual harassment in public transportation. What happened was they conducted a poll that revealed that 100% of women surveyed had experienced sexual harassment on public transportation. So they introduced these new measures, which include an emergency phone number to report harassment, and also the creation of an app for phones that can geolocate any reported incidents. And another sort of fun one is from Peru. Peru had initiated a countrywide campaign that was called Cat Call Your Mother, and it was a public service announcement, but it was actually a 3-minute fake documentary, and it featured men being tricked into catcalling their own moms. And actually, the campaign went viral in 2015. Or sorry, the campaign went viral a couple of years ago. And then in 2015, Peru enacted new legislation that covered sexual harassment in public spaces. And it's really interesting. Peru is one of only a few countries that has an entire law dedicated to sexual harassment in public places. And it very explicitly explains actions that are consistent with sexual harassment. So now catcallers, if they're convicted, they can actually face up to 12 years in prison.
Yeah, and it wasn't until we were really doing the additional research for the Google Hangout e-discussion that we learned that the documentary was fake. That's how good it is. You know, I had seen it maybe 2 years ago or a year ago, and we will definitely post it on the e-discussion after so you all can watch it.
So I'll move into the third thread, which is childcare and flexible work. And basically I just want to start by saying, obviously parents tend to have more limits on their mobility because they have childcare responsibilities. And of course, the larger percentage of this responsibility of childcare and other care work most often falls on women and girls. So the cost and availability of childcare and of free public education can affect whether a mother decides to seek paid employment outside the home or whether she stays at home with her children. So this can have real economic consequences. In fact, according to our data from our most recent report, the percentage of female wage earners in economies that provide public childcare or subsidized private childcare is more than twice that in economies that don't. But still, we found that of the economies that we covered, 39 do not provide or subsidize any kind of childcare. But there is good news, and that's that countries are reforming. So just a couple of examples. Tajikistan now has a law on preschool education and provides public childcare services. And Turkey recently introduced 1 year of free preschool education for children ages 4 to 5.
And we also look at other types of laws that can support parents and their mobility and economic empowerment, especially women. And one of those types of policies that we look at is access to flexible work arrangements, sometimes called flex time, or part-time work for parents who have children. And so we found that in 32 economies, the law offers easier access to flexible work schedules or part-time work to parents with children than parents who don't have, or people who don't have children. And so you'll see actually in the law, it'll say something like, in the case of Iceland, it'll say employers are required to make the necessary arrangements to enable men and women to balance family life and work, including the arrangement of work in a flexible manner. Countries like even Angola, in their labor legislation, also say something similar. Their law says that an employer must facilitate part-time work arrangements for workers with family responsibilities. So you actually see the law giving the right to parents to sort of ask for flexible work or part-time work, which is great because you don't have to worry then, in a lot of cases things come up last minute, and if you kind of have to depend on your employer to just give you that additional benefit, it can be pretty concerning, and you could be in a position where you have to choose between your family and your job. And so another interesting policy that we're only just starting to look at is parental leave policies that enable parents to take part of their parental leave on a part-time basis. So what does that mean? It's that parents can actually take a portion of their leave, let's say the last few weeks. They can go back to work on a part-time basis but still receive the subsidy that they were getting from the government or the employer. So we see countries like Sweden and even Uruguay recently sort of innovating these sort of new policies.
I think that would actually be a really interesting topic for a future e-discussion. So hopefully we can research that a little bit more as the years go by. So I'm sure we're sort of getting over our time here, so I'll try to start wrapping it up. As a quick conclusion, we just tried to say that legal discrimination against women obviously can have significant implications for their mobility and their economic empowerment.
And in fact, our 2016 report found that legal discrimination, such as the kind that we talked about today, is associated with a lot of very undesirable economic consequences, such as fewer girls attending secondary school relative to boys, fewer women working or running businesses, and a wider gender wage gap.
Yeah, and the things we talked about today, the sort of lack of legal protections against sexual harassment, limitations on freedom of movement, and then the lack of public or subsidized childcare, all of these things can limit women's mobility and keep women from reaching their full economic potential. So just to wrap up, we do want to mention that our website, wbl.worldbank.org, has downloadable data for all 173 economies that we covered and sort of expands on all of these topics, and we have a lot of great resources on there, including our new infographic video.
Yeah, and we also want to mention one of the unique things about our data set is that we actually provide links to all the primary legal sources that we cite to, so you can actually go look country by country at all the laws, and we cover 7 indicators, so there's a lot of things we obviously didn't talk about today that do actually have an impact on women's mobility, such as domestic violence laws, and so we urge you to go onto our website and take a look.
So thank you everyone for your attention so much, and now we'll turn it back over to Anna. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Nisha. This was a very, very useful presentation with so many different country examples. And I think we need to talk broadly about the obstacles to women's economic empowerment. And you gave very, very concrete examples. So I thank you so much for this, and I think this is very helpful. And I hope that our participants have taken on some of these examples, and maybe we can also post some of these on the discussion thread, because they're really interesting to look deeper into, as you said, about the parental leave and how you can use them not in a dedicated period after childbirth, but use them also to balance work and family responsibilities. So we will bring in one of our first discussants, Hemant Ramachandra. He is a partner at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, here in the US, and he runs a global practice focusing on digital technologies. And he grew up in several countries, including Nigeria, England, India, and the US. And he has a degree in computer science, and he is a PwC He for She champion and a global sponsor for PwC's Women in Technology initiative. And from our side, we're very excited because Hemant is also leading the team that is working with us in redesigning Empower Women. And as our community knows, we will launch our new redesigned platform in March. So I would like also to take this opportunity, Hemant, to thank you for that. But Hemant, if we go a little bit beyond the legal aspects, I think the technology, you work in technology, and I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit, how can technology be an enabler or an inhibitor to gender equality and women's mobility?
Great, thanks Anna for the introduction, and it's my pleasure and honor to be doing work with you and your team. You know, when I was listening to the conversation we just had right now, I was taking some notes down, and I want to talk about technology first in the context of the public sexual harassment. Nowadays, there's actually introduction of technology where a person can carry its tiny device on themselves, and if they ever have any challenges or they're accosted in a public setting, they can actually press this device, and it'll actually sound an alarm, and even send information to their friends that they have coded into the device, and that way their friends know whether they're safe or not, and also can also even tell them exactly where this person is. So that's a pretty interesting concept from a technology perspective that can be leveraged. But to answer your question around whether technology is an enabler or an inhibitor, there's kind of multiple dimensions around that. So what I'd like to first put forward is technology can be an enabler. So obviously there are these legal matters that have to be addressed right first. So like in Iran, a woman cannot leave the house necessarily, or what was said about in Afghanistan and all that. But one way that technology can be an enabler is to allow women to be able to do their own business through technology at home or in other locations where they cannot leave the facility without permission. Obviously, that assumes that there's a law that they need their husband's permission, which is another challenge to do this. But it can be, and they can use that technology to actually start their own business or connect network out there. So, for example, with Empower Women, there are lots of tools available within the Empower Women purview or sphere of influence. And as long as the woman has access to that, they're then able to network and connect globally to other women and see what they're doing and maybe even take some of those ideas. So that's where technology can be an enabler. Another part of where technology can be an inhibitor is, I actually read a recent article where as more and more technology comes into play, where it replaces the human workforce, human labor, and takes away some of the burdens that the people are doing in the factories and all that. We already have an imbalance in gender inequality right now in the workplace. So an inhibitor is where when the technology comes in and takes away jobs from people, the study said that most likely, statistically, women will lose the jobs versus men, and men will actually retain the job and make sure that they retain a job rather than be replaced by that technology. So those are the kind of inhibitors that could actually cause some challenges. So I'm not actually answering the question. I'm kind of throwing in more challenges that we have to be facing with technology. But I do honestly believe that technology can actually help and empower people and women. But again, it goes back to what was said earlier. There are all these legal laws in these countries that have to be first addressed. So there are some challenges that we have to get past before technology can even be leveraged sometimes.
Thank you so much, Heyman. Also, you are the PwC He for She champion. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what role men can play to kind of overcome these challenges, and both for gender equality and women's mobility?
Sure. So I'm not the only PwC He for She champion. PwC, we are a major supporter of the He for She initiative and have actually a dedicated organization for that globally. And so I'm one of many PwC He for She champions globally in PwC. So and actually, and a proud member of that community. So from a He for She perspective, so I'll use myself as an example, right? So when I signed up to be a He for She champion, I just didn't sign up just to put my name out there and make a pledge. I said, okay, what can I do beyond that pledge? And working with some of our partners, especially our diversity leader for our organization, we decided that we will bring the women together in our office, have a conversation, a dialogue with them, and then that's when we met you, right, Anna, at that point. And that connection has allowed us now to work with you directly from an Empower Women perspective, and actually, completely transform the Empower Women web presence and make it more relevant and more, especially from a millennial perspective and young girls globally. So to me, that's one way I am contributing back from a He for She perspective. That that's what I believe in, gender equality. And I believe that it starts at that point, and then helping bring about the right message. Other partners are doing many different things in our firm. One of our leaders is constantly on the road talking about He for She and making sure that the PwC values and culture is known around how we ensure that we have gender equality in our firm, and not only in the U.S. but globally too.
Thank you so much, Heyman. We'd like to call upon Julie Babinard. And Julie is a senior transport specialist in the transport unit at the World Bank. She's focusing specifically on, in this context of transport, on sexual harassment in public places. So Julie, we will connect with you by phone, and we hope that this will work. We will put our phone here to connect. Could you talk a little bit about how sexual harassment in public places affect women's economic empowerment? We had Katrin and Nisha addressing it a little bit, but if you could go a little bit more in depth and talk about how the sexual harassment in public places have an impact.
Yes, happy to do so.
Go ahead.
Great, thank you so much for this invitation to this very to public security transportation. It is a worldwide phenomenon, and it does affect both men and women. Recently it has been in the news more often and increasingly, primarily because of two aspects. One was a brutal and violent event that took place a couple of years ago in India where a woman was raped in a minibus, and that triggered a lot of worldwide attention and sort of raise the issue of public security for women in transportation. Publicized polls by the Reuters Council Foundation that asked nearly 6,000 women worldwide from 15 of the world's largest cities in both developed and developing countries about how fearful they were about using public transportation systems. And the overwhelming majority was that women do feel insecurity in general. And the worst cases were in countries of Latin America, where 6 in 10 women in major cities there reported that they had been physically harassed while using public transportation. With the cities of Bogota and Colombia having the most unsafe public transportation system, followed by Mexico City and Lima in Peru. And this is particularly relevant for women's mobility and women's access to economic opportunities, because we know that women have different travel patterns than men. Women tend to have less access to cars and private modes of transportation in general. They tend to walk more and they tend to use public transportation more. So when public transportation systems feel unsafe or are unsafe, they're less likely to be mobile. And we also have studies that show that when women have less access to public transportation and they are less mobile, they will have less access to economic opportunities. They will look for jobs that are closer to their homes, either because they cannot move to other jobs or because they need to get closer to their homes because they have other tasks to attend to and their mobility is time constrained. So overall, worldwide, we know it's a problem, and we know that women from poor income levels and from developing countries are more likely to be affected. Women from higher income brackets will more likely have access to a car, and there might be, as a result, some equity issues between women of different income levels. That's what we know at the moment, and so that's what we're trying, for example, at the World Bank is increasingly to look at how can we improve the factors that make public transportation systems so safe for women.
Thank you.
I hope the sound quality is not too bad.
Thank you so much. So in this context, what regulatory and other strategies can help protect women in public places?
Yeah, so I think a very important aspect, and I'm very glad that the initiative Women, Business and the Law is frankly the issue of personal security in transportation, because there is a really big connection between having a legal framework for personal security and the issue of lack of access to security in transportation systems and public space. Obviously, providing security in transportation system is one aspect, but a woman or a man, as soon as they are out of the public transportation system, may very well have the same security issues by just walking on the street or being in a public building. So it's really about having an overall sense of security in a public space, and public transportation cannot be the sole responsible system for making security a viable policy. And alone, the public transportation system will not guarantee security. What's encouraging is that we see that there is a global trend for engaging in awareness campaigns, as my colleague had hinted in the introduction. And we've seen also some countries, there are very few of them, but some countries have started to enact legislation that covers sexual harassment in public spaces. Peru started doing this in 2015. But, there's a big gap still between countries that do not have such frameworks. And I think the best historical policy that has sort of spearheaded some of the issues that we need to consider is in relation to sexual harassment in the workplace. Because policies for sexual harassment in the workplace have sort of helped
before we move on to our next discussant, Tulsi from the UN Global Compact, I would just like to go back to Hemant. I know that PwC is working a lot on unconscious bias and that you're trying to change the mindset within your company. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that can help in this area?
Sure, thank you. So, unconscious bias is basically where we, due to what environment we grow up in, or culture, or just any kind of setting, we unconsciously have certain biases. So we have an inherent perception of a person when they come to us. So stereotypes, right? So one of the things that we do in our firm is we focus on making sure that we provide the appropriate kind of training, and so that people can learn how to understand their unconscious biases and be aware of them. And again, these are not intentional when they happen. Even I have unconscious biases because of things that I've gone through in my life, and we focus on that. So one of the things that we have done around that is, from an unconscious bias perspective, also is from a gender equality perspective, is especially in technology. So from a technology perspective, we fully understand, not only in our firm, but if you look at Silicon Valley and globally, there are not many women in the technology space, and there are many reasons for that. So we have, it's a grassroots effort started by women in our firm, called an organization that's called Women in Technology. And the idea behind that is to come together as a community, men and women, and to help bring the support system and the enablers to ensure that women have the opportunities that they deserve, but also to bring forward any types of unconscious biases that can be addressed and immediately taken care of, so that they don't become challenges for our successful women who have degrees in computer science, or software developers, or part of our technology organization. So it's, like I said, it started as a grassroots effort, and has really done, we've done a significant job under leadership of some of our women leaders. And one important part of it is, we recently presented at a conference called the Grace Hopper Conference, and that's a conference dedicated to women in technology and the sciences. And we had a pretty significant presence there. And if you just, maybe 3 years ago, we wouldn't have been there. So like anything else, it's a journey, and we take the right steps, and we slowly start expanding and growing. So that type of movement has also brought forward this, direct connection and communication with people in the firm, especially the men, on how to address and to ensure that they don't necessarily have unconscious biases towards working with women or people of other cultures and all that. So I wanted to make sure I just pointed that out, because that's also part of the overall, I would call the gender equality framework that we have within PwC, and should also be part of from the framework for any other corporation or people around the world. So thank you for asking that question, Anna.
Thank you so much. And I think this links very well to what Julie was talking about, sexual harassment in public spaces, because much in many countries around the world, it might just happen out of habits and unconscious bias, and to really work on different direction from the legal perspective to really make the men in the public spaces aware that this behavior is unacceptable. So thank you so much both for bringing in these perspectives. We now have Tulsi. She's joining by phone. And Tulsi is a Women's Empowerment Principles Coordinator at the UN Global Compact. The Women Empowerment Principles, WEPS, is a joint initiative between the UN Global Compact and UN Women. And we try to, through this initiative, to seek to address gender dimensions in corporate responsibility and the business role in sustainable development. Tulsi joined the WEPS team in 2013, and she's working hard to raise awareness of the business on gender equality issues. So Tulsi, why should the private sector care about the legal environment for women.
Thank you, Anna, and apologies for the technical difficulties and not being able to see my face, everyone. But good morning or good afternoon, and thanks so much for having me on this Google Hangout. As Anna mentioned, just by a quick introduction, I work for the UN Global Compact, which is a voluntary initiative based on CEO commitments to implement universal sustainability principles. And the UN Global Compact really calls on companies from around the world to act responsibly by embedding principles around human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And so, of course, within this human rights dimension, legal environment and the rule of law come in. So for businesses, we found that an operating environment which is governed by the rule of law provides the basis for commercial certainty and creates a foundation for long-term investment and growth. So inequalities in human rights, or even violations of human rights, specifically women's rights, undermines the rule of law. And that can potentially, deter businesses from investing or having operations in that country because there's a perception of unstable business environment which can restrict the ability to conduct business. There can also be potential reputational and legal risks. So there's a strong business case for the having a rule of law as well as ensuring that all rights are respected. So companies have a minimum standard of respecting these rights, but they also have the opportunity to support them by positively contributing to strengthening legal frameworks. So there's a huge also opportunity and business case for companies to support legal institutions and to make them accountable to their stakeholders and citizens. The inequalities in rights as seen through kind of the concrete data that we talked about today here in the World Bank report really highlights the tremendous opportunities for companies to create an enabling environment for women's economic empowerment. As we all know, because we're probably very well accustomed to this space, there's a huge case for gender equality. It makes stronger teams, it makes diverse thought, brings positive benefits to individuals, families, communities, businesses, and economies. So there's a strong case that companies would really want to support this as well. Legal barriers preventing women to participate in the formal workforce and reach their full potential as entrepreneurs or employees can really impede not only national development policies from reaching their intended mark, but also can decrease business opportunities for innovation and, like I mentioned, diverse thought. So again, there's a real business imperative to do so to make sure that women's rights are respected and supported. And while governments are setting the legal framework, the private sector can play a key role in creating this enabling environment for inclusive growth. I think there's a growing number of business leaders that see the interdependence of business success with their sustainability of the societies in which they operate. So ensuring that all rights are respected and that women are really part of the labor force participation at an equal rate as their male counterparts is extremely important.
Thank you so much, Tulsi. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what role business can play in tackling these issues and if you have any concrete examples?
Sure, definitely. And I know that we've heard some today from our colleagues here at PwC as well as some other examples that the World Bank colleagues brought up. But I think it's a great starting point. The UN Global Compact has some really great initiatives that support companies in advancing with gender equality. So as Anna mentioned at the beginning, the Women's Empowerment Principles offers a comprehensive framework for business to advance gender equality in the workplace, marketplace, and community. So the 7 principles offer concrete actions that can help support or respect human rights and women's rights, but also support women's rights. And we also have an initiative called the Rule of Law Framework, which really helps companies engage with strengthening the rule of law in the countries in which they operate. earlier, by supporting access to childcare, dependent care, and creating zero tolerance violence policies or even solutions one to prevent situations of violence against women um, or addressing domestic violence victims and helping supporting them. So some examples, and I'm happy to discuss after with questions, but that we've seen in our role here is some really great practices. So an example is a company in Australia has made all roles flex to really foster an environment where employees, including parents, have the opportunity to have a well-balanced life. And this obviously supports parents in their role as parents as employees. So managers are tasked to show why a role is not supposed to be flexed rather than why it is supposed to be flexed. Another example in discussing or addressing violence, I should say, is there's a few companies that we work with that in India that provide transport for women to and from work. As mentioned previously, there's countries around the world that do restrict the hours that women can work. So this is providing a solution to make sure that women are getting to and from work in a safe manner. So there's a real opportunity there for companies to create solutions to some of the problems that were addressed earlier. Other examples include companies are recognizing that domestic violence has a business impact and a cost, and so they're offering support systems for victims of violence and even offering paid leave to victims of violence to make sure that they're supported through the process and that they can come back to work as well when they're ready. A Bangladesh company offers specific insurance products for women of domestic violence and rape, which I think is a great innovative. I mean, obviously, it's not great that they have to do this, but they're innovating specific products for women to address some of the issues that they're facing. So I'll stop there, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity for companies, as I mentioned before, to really strengthen the enabling environment in which women's economic empowerment can be fostered. And so, where around the world governments are not yet supporting and respecting the human rights of women, there's a business imperative and business case for businesses to do so.
Thank you so much, Tulsi. We have received a few questions, and I welcome other questions from our participants today. So what I will do, I will address most of these questions directly to the World Bank team. And if any of the discussions also would like to answer them, I will give you an opportunity to do so. So maybe you could just raise your hand and we'll open your microphone. But the first question relates to conflict and epidemics. So for example, we know in West Africa when the Ebola outbreak happened, that it did actually restrict, and we had some discussions on Empower Women around how it limited women's mobility and their opportunity, especially cross-border traders. Women who trade across borders could no longer cross the borders for their regular trade and economic activities. So the question here is if you have seen any good initiatives to support women's mobility in those kind of times, whether in conflict or when it's related to epidemics that control the mobility broadly within the country, but then specifically supporting women in these cases.
So let me just turn it over, before answering that question, turn it over to Julie, who I believe had a comment on what was said previously. I think Julie is muted right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I think I will try to address the comment that you raised and also add the comment that I wanted to make in response to what was said. I think what we see is that in order to address women's mobility needs at the moment, there is no silver bullet. And I think what we would take are some flexible options depending on the local context and depending on what women's immediate needs for mobility are. So in the context of conflict and disaster, well, conflict is different than risk management, but in the context of conflict and epidemic, I do not know particularly of any specific mobility initiatives that have been put in place, but I could guess that the way forward we need to find some temporary transport solution by helping to help these women have temporary mobility and temporary transportation. And that relates to the other comment that my colleague was making about how women or employers are providing transportation at very specific times for women to enhance their cases. Increasingly, we're trying to find responses that are tailored to women's needs as a short-term solution. Another example is providing women only forms of transportation, and this has been in the news as well as an example of a potential band-aid solution for women when they cannot be using transportation in a safe manner. Now, it's fine. It has been working in some contexts in some countries around the world when women are being harassed, when you have very crowded systems and women have no choice if they want to use transportation to engage in economic activity and be able to do it. The system to be for their mobility. And this is not a long-term solution. We're not trying to promote the use of transportation in a segregated manner. Women are 50% of the population, and they need to be feeling safe just like men, and they should not have specific time or they should not be segregated in the long term. This is not cost efficient. So in relation to the point that was made, I can see how there's a benefit to having an employer that provides a safety solution, but we want to put back on the agenda this issue of having a legal framework and having a legal basis for making sure that women are safe in par with their male counterparts. We want to have inclusive societies and inclusive public transportation that benefits all. Because then we could also have transportation systems, that starts providing solutions for elderly people only or for male only, and that's not what we want. So again, we also have some countries where women have no access to health services because they don't have access to hospitals or health clinics, and sometimes we provided services to them by providing mobile clinics. So instead of having the woman move, we move the service to the woman. So for conflict areas, you could have temporary transportation service, but again, there are a range of options. And so what we're trying to say is, depending on where you are and at which point you are in trying to provide mobility to this woman, you need to think of a tailored solution. And the ultimate goal being to have public transportation for all that is inclusive and equitable.
Thank you so much. I will take a few comments before moving on to the next question. But I think you're bringing up a very interesting issue of bringing the health services to women. And I'm also thinking in terms of jobs. There are many initiatives today that are trying to bring the jobs to women to counter the fact that the legislation or other reasons might not bring the women or enable women to go to work. So I think that I read a very interesting article last week in China where the big problems of smog that they had in December created major issues of mobility for the population. Not only the women who had difficulties going to work because of the health issues, but also that all the schools closed down and the daycare centers closed down, and somebody had to be home with the children. and how in those situations the technology could help women to work from home, and how and that brings up the element that Eamon discussed earlier with technology as an enabler. But I'd like to bring up a few comments that we have received from a few participants. One is saying, I'm a victim of the issue being discussed. I cannot go anywhere with my husband without my husband's consent. It's so bad that I'm forced to attend the same place of worship with him. So here's one comment. Another one says, hi everybody, thanks for bringing up this issue. It is quite unbelievable that in this 21st century, a woman has to provide husband's consent before being issued travel documents like national passports and visa in Nigeria. This is pure violation of women's human rights to freedom of movement. This should end. So I'd like to thank our two participants for these comments. I'd like to address the next question. Which disappeared. Maybe you can pick that up, Diana. Let me see what other comments we have. Yeah, one question is about raising funds for technology startups. And how difficult is it to actually raise those funds from investors that are usually men? And I think this comes into a little bit of the unconscious bias that we discussed earlier. How can we build confidence in those investors and enable women to start their tech companies?
You want me to take that?
Sure. Thank you, Eamon.
So, what I can do, and share with you, I came across some investors that actually focus on diversity and women, but so diverse entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs that I can share with you that you can pass along to the team. But the question is a very valid question, right? Because there's this unconscious bias that men are the entrepreneurs and the inventors, and that's how it is. But I've come across a lot of very ingenious women and who have amazing ideas. I know that there was an organization I read about that was specifically formed to help women who have ideas to bring them forward. In Africa, for example, there's the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It's called the YALI, Young African Leaderships Initiative. So I'm not sure if the question came from Africa, but if they have not heard of the YALI Foundation, they should definitely reach out to them. And it's connected to Nelson Mandela. I had the opportunity to speak to some of the YALI fellows last year in Chicago, and some amazing. It's interesting when I walked in. And actually, having grown up in Nigeria and West Africa, you kind of walk in with certain expectations. But interesting enough, there was pretty much an equal representation of men and women in the room. And a lot of the women, after I spoke at that conference, actually came in. And many of them were entrepreneurs who had already started a business, but were looking for a global network to connect to, so they could share their ideas and also to kind of garner interest in their product or services. So those kind of foundations are really very helpful. I know that there are others in Asia and obviously in the Western Hemisphere. But what I can do, Anna, is I'll send you the link to this article I came across about investors that specifically invest in diversity and in women. Okay.
Thank you so much, Heyman. I think that would be very useful. We could also post it at the e-discussion thread. So either you can do that or we can do it on our end. I think that would be very interesting for our participants to benefit from. I think we are coming close to the time, so I would ask each of you, Catherine and Nisha, to add any additional comments, and then we go to Tulsi, Hemant, and Julie. So do you want to start, Catherine?
Sure. So thank you again, everyone, for participating, and a special thank you also to our experts for taking the time to participate today. What we just want to sort of mention is that we recognize that laws are just one step sort of improving women's mobility and combating gender discrimination, empowering women, and so on. What you need to do first is reform laws so that you can enforce them, have something to implement, but you also need a strong civil society, strong governments, other initiatives, a lot of the things that Julie mentioned and some of the other panelists mentioned can sort of help having technology that allows people to work from home in places where sort of legal restrictions on women's mobility still lie. Also, there's been so much innovation lately with technology in terms of just transportation. I know in India there was a group of taxi drivers. I think they're like the Pink Ladies, or they had a name, and it was sort of a woman, or maybe it was in Saudi Arabia or India, but it was a woman-only taxi service. It sort of helped women feel more secure in sort of traveling. So just to sum up, it kind of takes a lot of efforts from different angles, not just legislative ones, to sort of combat this problem.
Yeah, and we just hope that you can use Women, Business, and the Law as a resource to start sort of use as the first step in getting the reforms to take place, and for other people in civil society, NGOs, government to use as sort of an advocacy tool to make these changes happen at every level, not just at the legal level. And thanks everyone so much.
Need to change people's thought and step out with confidence and provide and know that they are equally talented. We have another participant saying that women's rights have been given to them by the creator of the mankind, considering the physical and psychological and emotional makeup. And women need to reposition themselves and leverage all these skills. It's another one is saying it's so wonderful seeing groups coming out to fight for the right of women. This is the set time to work in total freedom and to reach realm of destiny. We can't be sidelined. Let us stand up and speak out for the whole world to hear. So thank you so much for this comments, and I hope that the conversation will continue after the Google Hangout at the e-discussion. But Julie, would you like to say some few comments?
Yes. Well, I think this has been a very rich discussion on many levels. I'm quite impressed that various experts here are actually doing some merging of ideas between sectors and the understanding that we will get different interventions and different sectoral inputs, and that there is momentum to make progress on those issues, hopefully. So I feel encouraged in this discussion, and I hope these women who are indeed feeling the burden, the transport burden of having a mobility affected, can find a little bit of hope in the fact that people are increasingly aware of this burden, and that hopefully change can take place at some point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tulsi, are you still there?
Yes. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna, and the World Bank for inviting the UN Global Compact. And I just want to echo all the comments that have already been said. I think, there's a huge opportunity. The macroeconomic case is really clear, and so continuing to advocate to governments to bring down the legal barriers to women's economic empowerment is crucial. And we launched a call to action this past September in partnership with over 20 leading business and civil society organizations, including UN Women, to do just that. And so I think, it's clearer than ever. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. So all actors have a crucial role to play in creating opportunities for women's economic empowerment. And I think, the time is now, especially with the launch of the SDGs. So, there's some great work already being done, but it's definitely time to scale up and continuing that great work.
Thank you so much, Tulsi. We have a comment here in French. I should read the French. Dans les pays post-conflit, comme les autres, ce sont les femmes qui font nourrir les familles. Les hommes sont sans travail et ceux qui ne sont pas payés. Basically, in conflict countries like others, it's the women that feed their families. Many men are without jobs and or they are not paid. Les femmes transportent les sacs les plus de 100 kilos juste pour gagner $3. Les $3 sont utilisés pour la famille. Quand l'homme a eu la chance de gagner $5, il consomme la bière avec. Okay, so the comment here is that investing in women basically pays off. The participant here is saying that women transport bags of more than 100 kilos and just to earn $3, and the $3 is entirely used for the family. While the men might earn more, $5, they often spend it on beer. So I think this is a good point. In investment in women really pays off for our families, communities, and societies. So I will ask Heyman to add anything that you'd like. And then Sharon, I will ask you to talk a little bit about the discussion that will follow this.
Sure, thank you, Anna. I was thinking about what to talk about, and everything that our colleagues on the Hangouts have been talking about is very relevant. So I want to tie this back to something that we do in PwC called the megatrend. So we're looking at where the future of our planet is going, and there are these megatrends that we have, 5 of them. One of them is demographic and social change. So essentially, the population is getting older, and there'll be more aging people around the world. So the burden of taking care of the parents and the grandparents in many of the countries falls on the woman. And one of the things that we have to look at from that kind of megatrend is how do we empower the women to, socially they're required to take care of their the elderly parents and grandparents, but how do we empower them so that they can not only do that or at least get, but also have an independence and mobility that they deserve. Another mega trend is the shift in global economic powers. Obviously we all notice that there's a shift towards India and China, and now Africa also as a major economic power. But those are the areas that have the majority of the challenges with gender equality. So again, how do we manage that with this shift in economic power? The other one is rapid urbanization. So the tendency for everyone to live in cities and work in cities because the opportunities are there, but that puts a burden on women because they have to end up taking care of the household, just like everyone just talked about on the Hangouts today. So that's another area we have to look at. And then the last one, actually the second last one, is climate change and resource scarcity. So as we have more water scarcity, and I know the UN has actually published something around this, where it's causing a burden and causing challenges for young girls, where parents, in order to remove them from their household, are marrying their daughters off at a very young age because of the scarcity of resources. So that also is another area we have to really look into. And the last one is technology breakthroughs. And I honestly believe that if done correctly and focused correctly, technology will be a true enabler for gender equality. And and that's, we need to find the right mix of technology and people focusing on technology to make things happen. So I just wanted to end with that, Anna.
Thank you so much, Heyman. Before I turn it over to Sharon to brief us a little bit about what happens next, we have had two participants that is referring to the pink taxi. So I'd encourage everybody to talk a little bit about the experiences on how is that working out. So we have Sabine is talking about the pink taxi in Pakistan. And we also have Emad from Egypt talking about pink taxis in Egypt. So I encourage everyone to really share with us in the e-discussion what are the implications and are these good practices that we could take to other countries. So over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Anna. There's an echo on my end. Okay, great. Gosh, what a rich and fantastic discussion. And one of the things I love about this topic is there are really so many dimensions that affect all of us, no matter where in the world we're coming from. And so with that in mind, the discussion does not end today. The information exchange does not end today, and over the next 2 weeks we will open a knowledge discussion thread on our website and can provide the link to you, and would encourage you to look at the 3 different discussion threads that we've talked about today, whether it's sexual harassment in public places, whether it's the legal and social barriers, whether it's flexible childcare arrangements and some of the other subcomponents that we've talked about. And go on to the thread. We have a couple of additional participants that will be lending their expertise. We have another person from the UN Global Compact, their chief legal officer, so we're excited to have her on board. And we also have a woman from Jacqueline from the African Legal Center. So I promise it will be a very rich discussion thread and encourage all of you to participate. If there are links, I know Heyman mentioned a link he was going to share on that site. I know the UN Global Compact has one as well as the Women, Business, and the Law report. You'll be able to access all of that. And starting the thread, I encourage you to start by watching the World Bank Group's fabulous video that gives you an overview of this issue. And if you have any questions, reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to address your questions at the Empower Women team or the World Bank Group. And just encourage you to participate and share this discussion thread with others. And it will take place between now and February 15th, and really welcome your participation. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for the World Bank for partnering with us with this Google Hangout and the e-discussion that will take place over the next 2 weeks. And Julie, Heyman, and Tulsi for joining us and for overcoming our technological challenges. So thank you so much, everyone, for your very valuable contributions. And we have heard not only the legal aspects, but many other aspects of women's mobility and how it influences their economic empowerment. So I welcome everyone. The discussion is up. We are just going to activate for you to start commenting. So give us just a few minutes and we are ready to engage with you in discussions. So thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you on empowerwomen.org. Thank you.